have a hard time saying no, I want to give you permission to do something. If something doesn't sit right with you, if you have a gut feeling about something, or maybe it's spirit led, or maybe it's you like not feeling completely at ease about it, I'm giving you permission to say no. And no is a complete sentence. Y'all know that, right? Let me play that back. Like, no is a complete sentence. And although I'm behind the microphone and y'all are listening to me, I'm really talking to myself, because I am guilty of not saying no because I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt somebody else's feelings. But ultimately, what happens by me saying yes when I should have said no, man, I'm always the one that ends up suffering. So, here we are. This is your girl Gianni with another episode of the Kannon Studios podcast. And this week we're going to talk about the word no and how it's a complete sentence. So stay tuned and stay with me. This is for all my people that are, they have a difficult time saying no. So stay tuned. All right. No is a complete sentence. You can say no, period. Like, somebody might be asking you to do something, whether that's at work, at home, whatever, your kid, and you may not feel like doing it. Now, listen, there's a difference in not feeling like doing something and being lazy, and like you literally needing to take a pause for yourself, because if you say yes to somebody else, it's gonna hurt you, right? Like, it's gonna damage you. And by no means am I saying, like, if God tells you to do something, do it. But nobody in our life is God other than God himself, right? Jesus Christ, right? Like, but if somebody's asking you to do something and is stressing you out, say no. Like, especially if it's an unhealthy stress. So I really have 3 points that I want to hit on today. And the first point is, sometimes saying no to them means saying yes to you. So if you tell somebody no, that gives you extra margin to say yes to yourself. And I don't mean like saying no, like in the literal sense of like, no, I'm not going to give you the money to do this because I'm going to go and spend this money on my flight. Like, it doesn't have to be like that literal. Sometimes it's like, no, I'm not going to talk to you on the phone and gossip for 30 minutes because I'm going to take this time like to myself, to meditate, to read, to drink some coffee, or like to literally sit in your car before you get out to go and manage the things that you have at home. Right? So sometimes saying no to them means saying yes to you. I'm not saying you don't always have the privilege to say no, but in some cases you do. If you have a friend that's calling you to gossip, you can tell them no and say yes to yourself. I've given you permission to do that. Now, from a business aspect, because this is technically like a business podcast, you can tell your client no if it's outside the confines of what you've defined as the service they're paying you for. But if they contact you outside of business hours, you don't have to respond. If they're micromanaging you, you don't have to respond. You can say no. If they're asking you to do something outside of the scope of work and you don't feel comfortable doing it because you're going to suffer, you can say no. Now, you may not say no, period. Like, if they ask you something, you may be able to word it differently and maybe sell them on something else, or say, no, I can't. That's not included in your scope of work. However, the solution to that is going to cost whatever dollar amount. But you can say, like, give yourself the power to say no, whether that's in personal life or in business. The second thing that I have is you have to stand strong in your decision. When you say no, stand strong in that. Because if you say no, then come back later and say yes, especially to a client, they're going to continue to take advantage of that. And then you'll still be the one that ends up suffering. So, yeah, stand strong in your decision to say no when needed. And listen, I understand it may be a difficult thing because you don't want to upset anybody, you don't like confrontation, and I get it. But like, what if a little confrontation or a little of you setting boundaries frees you? Frees you from like that heaviness that you may feel like every time that client calls or emails, you're like having like a mini panic attack because you don't know what they're going to ask for or if they're just going to up and quit. So stand strong in your decision and you'll actually end up getting more. In my experience, I've gotten more respect by saying no, what I'm not going to do. And then the third thing I have is if you have no boundaries, they will be defined for you. So if you have no boundaries and you just allow people to come to you and do whatever it is that they want, talk about, like request whatever project, whatever. If you have no boundaries in that, your client's going to define that for you. Your employer is going to define that for you. The world is going to define that for you. So you have to figure out what your boundaries are. If you're a business owner and you say, hey, my business out, and you communicate to your clients, my business hours that I am taking calls or that I'm available to speak with clients is between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. I don't know. If a client calls you at 2 o'clock, like, you have to define that boundary. If they are having a medical emergency, they shouldn't be calling you. And I'm pretty sure they're not calling you for a medical emergency. But if you have no boundaries and you're constantly answering the phone, even though you've told them, like, hey, office hours for phone calls are 9 to 1 or whatever, and they constantly keep calling you outside of that, they're going to continue to do it because they think it's okay. Right? If you're an employee and you know your office hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, but if somebody sends you something, your supervisor sends you something at 6 o'clock and say, hey, can you get this to me by the morning? And you do it, you're now the go-to for after hours work, overtime work, and not getting paid overtime. Right? So you have to define what those boundaries are within that. And what that looks like. So just remember that no is a complete sentence. As always, thank you for listening into this week's episode of the Kannon Studios podcast. If you got to this far in the podcast and you're still listening and you like what you heard, share this with 5 friends. Text it to them, share it on social media, all of that fun stuff. I would really, really, really appreciate it. That's all I got for today. So guys, you know what I say every single time. As always, y'all keep creating.